A very shocking bit of news came out yesterday from Kotaku doing an expose on Anthem and, of course, Bioware. And everybody is probably making dozens of YouTube videos on this. Few of you are probably saying EA is wrong, Bioware is in the right. Few of you are saying Bioware sucks, EA tried to save it, blah blah blah. But reading the article, I noticed one thing that stood out like a very big warning light, and it is a problem that can affect any studio regardless of its size and scope, and it has to do with understanding the value of your core gameplay loop. When it comes to game development, a lot of the process of making a game occurs during the development. Like from day one, you don't know exactly how your game is going to turn out. But there is one thing you need to understand as quickly and as early as possible if you want to have any attempt at succeeding in finishing your game, and that is the core gameplay loop. If you missed our previous talks on this, the core gameplay loop is essentially the primary system or mechanic that is going to be the basis for your game's design. If we're doing a platformer, it's going to be jumping. If you're playing a first-person shooter, you're going to be shooting people, and you get the picture. And while that may sound very simple, developers from all across the industry have spent from thousands to millions of dollars, sometimes failing on figuring that out. And it's very important to understand why this is such a vital part of your game. The core gameplay loop essentially is the foundation for all decisions, elements, iterating, or evolving your design is going to come from. Because this is what the player is going to be doing. It doesn't matter if you have a great customization or personalization system if nobody wants to play your game to begin with. And this has become a very tough point, especially for many first-time developers. A lot of developers from the independent space, and we've seen this with some of these games, will start out with, hey, I got this really cool idea for a game mechanic, and that's it. There is nothing more beyond just 10 to 20 seconds of gameplay, and then trying to disguise that with all manner of bonus systems, crazy or controversial graphics. You get the picture. Or we see things go the other way, that the developer has no idea what the core gameplay loop is, and instead just tries to throw as many different mechanics and systems at their title to try and make something like a Frankenstein monster of game mechanics and systems. We're going to have a cooking mini game, and there's also going to be a stealth section. We're going to also throw in platforming and endless runner, and why not have a battle royale mode in there just because? And the problem that we've seen is that this creates games that feel, again, like just a very clunky mess of elements. The very best games, you can tell when everything is working in unison. Every system basically interacts or feeds into another one. It's essentially a well-oiled machine. And getting a game to that state takes a lot of expert design and understanding what it means to develop a game. And even with that said, though, even if you do know what you want your game to be, that can still create issues when we get to the actual development process of it. And this is another area where a lot of developers have struggled with. We're going to switch to the Kotaku article in a few minutes, but I want to spend a few more minutes on this specific point when it comes to the core gameplay loop. Because even if you have a great idea for what your game's going to be, reality and your head can be two very different things. You may think it's great that I want to throw in a procedurally generated, massively multiplayer online universe, and I'm going to get this done in 6 months. That's never going to happen. I don't care how great of a developer you are. But it's very important to understand that your core gameplay loop is it. That is the foundation for your game. If you get away from your core gameplay loop, you don't understand what it is, or you're adding elements that take away from it, you're going to end up with a worse product because of it. And this is why many games go through a prototyping or pre-production stage, because you need to figure out if you can actually make this game. It may be amazing to create a never-ending worldwide global sensation of a multiplayer game, But if you don't have the skills or the technology or the people to build that game, then you can't really go forward with that. And this is why for many developers who give advice to new or starting out, is to quickly figure out what you are capable of. Again, the concept of fail small or fail fast comes into play. You don't want to spend 5 years of your life to then figure out, hey, this idea that I just spent this time on, I can't finish it. So what do I do? I think we all know the answer to that. But another major point, though, about settling on the core gameplay loop is that all your decision making must be filtered through it. And if you keep changing your core gameplay, you are changing every aspect of your game. This isn't just taking 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. This is taking 2 steps forward and then 27 steps back. And I hate to keep bringing up the studio because I love their idea and their game, but it's still the quintessential example of what happens when you don't get the core gameplay loop right. And that's with Clockwork Empires. Now, we've looked at this game many times here on the channel. I have, again, spoken at length about it. But for today's conversation, the problem that Gaslamp Games ran into with Clockwork Empires is that they never were able to finalize their core gameplay loop. They had a great concept, a steampunk Lovecraftian 3D dwarf fortress. That checks off a lot of my boxes for a game, and I'm sure as well for you folks watching. The problem is, how do you take that idea and turn it into a fully developed game? I would wait here for an answer because unfortunately, Gaslamp weren't able to answer it themselves. Over the course of their early access period, they had, I want to say, over 50 different versions of that game released, 50 different monthly iterations, and many times they would go back over a system that they already created and change it around. But guess what happens when you do that? When you change one part of your core gameplay loop, it affects all the other elements attached to it. So you have to spend time balancing them. But then what happens? You create bugs that you have to spend more time fixing. Okay, you get all that done. Now you gotta play test the new stuff. But guess what? It didn't work out. So we have to do it again. And again. And this is all not only wasting your time, but you are creating content that you will never use. Now, some developers will probably defend this kind of practice by saying that, again, game design is not an exact science. You are supposed to keep iterating on an idea and keep going forward. But the problem is there has to be a foundation. There has to be a goal, the light at the end of the tunnel for you to achieve. If you don't know what you're aiming for, how do you know that your game is done? Or even what the finished state of your game looks like? And again, these are questions that for a lot of you watching this right now, you can probably think that there is a very easy answer to this. But again, many developers, whether they are large or small, have succumbed to this problem. Again, with Clockwork Empires, each time they changed a system, they would keep getting away from their core gameplay loop. And even when they were up to patch month 30 or 40 of that game in early access, they were still trying to figure out, how does someone play this game? How do you end a game of Clockwork Empires? And you can see the counterexample of this when it came to Prison Architect. Introversion, when they started making the game, the first, I think, 4 or 5 builds of that game or versions were very rough. There was no real gameplay loop. They were still just trying to figure out, okay, how do I get my little prisoners to move around? How do I make a building? But once they settled on that core gameplay loop, everything else came into picture, or it came into clarity. Every new update would either add new elements or iterate or refine previous ones. And again, they all stemmed from that core gameplay loop. So by the time they finish, or I should say finish, because they did post-release support on Prison Architect, it was pretty much done. You knew exactly what you were getting with that game, and it felt like a complete project. Studios like Nintendo and Blizzard have been really good at this as well in the past. Again, we've talked about this before with that kind of Nintendo magic, or Blizzard's factor, or as you're going to see in the article, the idea that Bioware has a magic as well. That again, that the very best games look like nothing was really done at all. Oh, Nintendo just made another Mario platformer. Whoop-de-doo. Blizzard made Overwatch. Wow, that took a lot of work. But it is a lot of work. And as we've said before, people don't complain about good games. If your game is done right, nobody is going to argue about that at all. But when your game sucks or if there's major problems, you will never hear the end about it until the end of time. But after a quick word to our Patreon backers, we're going to go into kind of our guided tour mode, and we're going to talk a little bit more about where Anthem and Bioware went horribly wrong. And now for a quick thank you to our Patreon backers. And if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, you'll find our Discord channel linked down below. Alright, here we have the article, how Bioware's Anthem went wrong on Kotaku. I'm going to be slowly but surely scrolling down, but also trying to highlight key points in it. But I guess the first bit that was kind of funny is that they originally had a different title, and then it decided to get changed by Electronic Arts so they couldn't secure the word. But as we keep going down through it, Anthem itself had many years of pre-production. Apparently, it was in development for at least 6 years. And that, right off the bat, is very shocking. But as we go through the article, you can see again them talking about where the game is now. It has a 55 review score on Metacritic, and is probably going to go down as the biggest failure from Bioware. And again, Bioware, despite my lack of interest in their games, has been one of the most award-winning AAA studios for some time. I know there are quite a few out there who enjoy Mass Effect and Dragon Age. But as we scroll down, we'll look at a few more things about kind of the state of Bioware now, with many of the people who are major names at this company have left. There's been issues of health issues and depression, and that kind of stuff is just very bad. And there's a greater talk about unions and getting them for the game industry, and that's probably beyond the scope of this video here. But I want to stop here and point out this element right here. The whole idea of Bioware magic. As I said in the last part, when we look at major companies, the ones who continue to be the movers and shakers, they become trendsetters based on their games and what the announcements. Like I said with Nintendo, doesn't matter what Nintendo could reveal, it stops the news cycle when Nintendo makes a big announcement. Because people know about Nintendo's level of quality. The same thing goes for Blizzard. And BioWare here certainly believed it of themselves. But this right here, no matter how rough a game's production might be, things will always come together in the final months. That is a horrible mindset to have with your studio and with game development. Again, video games are a very polymorphous kind of development. You're never going to know exactly how a game's going to turn out from beginning to end. But you don't want your studio to be known as the place where everything is bad until it's not. That is not how you design a game. And the problem that a lot of people have when it comes to game development like this is that they only hear about the successes. Again, about the ragtag group of people who come together and at the very last minute, the game works and everybody is successful and rich and we all retire to our private islands. But that's not how you make a successful game. And more importantly, it's not how you make a successful studio. In a previous video, we talked about Cuphead and how Studio MDHR made an amazing game, but they also took a second mortgage out on their house to finish it. And people will point out that, again, it worked. That studio is now famous. But it could have turned out the opposite, and then that team is now homeless. Now, with BioWare here, again, it sounds like they've been having these kinds of issues for years now. But like we've said with the game industry, most people only care about the successes. It doesn't matter if you nearly killed yourself to make a game if that game turned out to be a 9.5 out of 10 Game of the Year winner. And we're seeing again more and more calls for having some level of quality of life when it comes to working at a studio. Now, as we scroll down further here for Anthem, you can start to see, and actually I'm going to scroll up for a second here, because you can read kind of like how things began. It looks like with Project Dylan originally. And the descriptions of the article definitely pitch a completely different game from Anthem. Right here, saying that they could draw comparisons to Dark Souls, Darkest Dungeon, Shadow of the Colossus, with Bioware storytelling. I mean, I'm sure everybody reading this right now would want to play a game like that. Even I have to admit, that sounds like it's pretty amazing. There's going to be elements of persistent events in the world that would change how things would go. I mean, right here, the idea of having dynamic weather events that can completely upheave your strategy. This is all sounding really, really amazing. Again, there's just one little bit of a problem here. How do you make said game? And like I said in the last part, many developers stop at having a really cool idea and not knowing where to proceed with that. And when that happens, you start throwing elements and mechanics at the wall and hoping to find something that sticks. Again, right here, this sounds like it's going to be a main hook. They're trying to figure out how it works. But the problem is, how do you do that? And again, this is not a question that I'm asking you, because none of us know how to do that. Not one of us here, whether you're watching this video or me sitting here, has had to think about how to design a dynamic environment and getting monsters and such to work in there. And this is a very big problem. Because when we're talking about a game with multiple years of budget and work that goes into it, you kind of become, in some case, like a slow-moving Titanic. You know the iceberg is coming, but you can't do anything to get around it. And as we scroll down further, you can see how the team kept getting shaken up by people leaving, and them, again, just not really figuring out what Anthem was supposed to be. And this was long before like EA even really started to push for some of their design changes. Like right here in this paragraph, you can read about how they struggle with getting the flight system to work. And again, if flight is going to be part of your core gameplay loop, then it needs to be in your game from day one, not being taken in and out, on and off again and again. And it sounds like again that nobody was able to settle on what Anthem would be. Now, as we scroll down further here, you can again see how they kept trying to figure things out, and trying to figure out the story before the gameplay is another major no-no. Because if your story is supposed to make sense within the game space, and your game space keeps changing, well, it kind of creates a bit of a wrinkle in that now, doesn't it? More major heads were leaving. If we keep scrolling down, you can see this other issue right here. Nobody wanted to say Anthem is this. Now, whether that's from a pride standpoint, from an EA mandate, or just from nobody really figuring that out, I'm never going to know about. And unless another expose comes out, we may never hear about that as well. But this is a very big problem. It's the same thing that happened with Duke Nukem Forever. That they couldn't settle on their core gameplay loop, so they kept adding in more. Every time somebody made a new game, oh, let's add that into our game. That sounds cool. That's a really great system in this game. Why don't we put that in ours? And this is a serious problem, because if you don't know what your core gameplay loop is to begin with, how is all this stuff supposed to work? It's like trying to build a 10-story building, and your very first story is made out of paper mache. And you can't make these decisions without settling on the core gameplay loop. And I keep harping on that, but it is true. And this is essentially patient zero for how many of these games end up becoming failures. Right here, as they're saying that nobody could figure out what's going on. So they just leave it and then try and come back to it. And again, like right here, I hate to be mean, but no, that's not a valid excuse for not selling on your core gameplay loop. The best games that we have seen from developers, they will figure out a core gameplay loop within days or even weeks of developing their title. Because the quicker you get that settled on, will ultimately make your game better. If you already know that your game is amazing and there's no graphics or sound or anything other than just what you're doing for the first 5 minutes, then you know you're on to something, because it's only going to get better from there. This is why, for instance, right now a lot of us are very excited about Risk of Rain 2. It just started early access a week ago at the time of this recording, and we're loving the game that's there. They still have months of updates and things to add and fix and patch and whatever, but it's only going to get better because they know what their game is going to be. That has been locked down. You cannot get into year 1, 2, or however and not know what your basic gameplay loop is. And it doesn't matter what these aspects are, and that's a very big point. That there is no amount of talent, there's no amount of money or studio backing that will save a game if its core gameplay loop isn't working. It doesn't work. And Bioware here is definitely the latest example of this. Now, as we go down further, another major aspect, of course, is them using the Frostbite engine, which I've heard other developers say that they don't really like it as much. That is, I think this quote is pretty applicable right here. And again, this is compounded on the fact that they don't know what their game is going to be. So how do you work with an engine that you have no experience with, design a game that you haven't even figured out what the gameplay is going to be yet? And again, this is one of those hindsight is 2020 situations. We all here, sitting here, are probably just going, duh. You know, like, how could this game not be a failure when you read this kind of work? But again, many people will never hear stories like this. And I would bet you that nobody here would care if Anthem turned out great. If that quote-unquote Bioware magic came through at the 11th hour and the game turned out to be a 90 out of 100, nobody would care about these issues. You wouldn't care about these issues. Probably most other YouTubers and streamers wouldn't care either. But these are all issues that kind of, again, stem from a common problem. And if you can't get your core gameplay loop working, everything else is going to be affected by it. Yep, and here's another really good quote right here. And again, talking about working with an engine, that is a topic way too big for this video, which I'm not even sure what the length is right now, but I think we're going to be running long on it. So they're having issues. People are being pulled from other teams to work on something else. And these are definitely issues at the studio management level. And they are definitely part of this problem. Again, there is no such thing as one thing that kills a game. It's always a series of cascading problems and failures. One thing causing an issue that leads to another problem that causes another problem, and then it becomes very hard, again, to track the chain of events. Like I said, when it comes to games that fail, even the developer themselves may not know why this game failed. And it takes a very critical eye and someone who understands design to know, again, where this all began. And then as we keep going down, pre-production for 4 years. That means that the game hasn't even begun to be developed yet. They're still trying to figure out what the game is. And that's 4 years. I can only begin to fathom the amount of time, energy, and money that is forever lost over those 4 years of pre-production. And that is a very big point about your core gameplay loop. When you have to keep changing and rebuilding and adding and removing systems, that is all wasted effort. And that's effort that could, again, gone into making stuff that's going to stay in your game. Like I said a few minutes ago, there are developers who will point out that games are an iterative process, and that is certainly true. But every time you have to throw out work during production on your game, that is bad. That is an element of failure with your design. And again, as you're reading this, you can see how they were ignoring Destiny despite trying to build Destiny, or how Destiny became a part of this game. And then in 2016, there is a major point here that they had one of the people from EA come in, and he did not like the game. This is just a very, very nasty quote right here. Because I really want to know, what did they promise him to begin with? And, how they promised that without even knowing what their game was going to be. And again, let me just make things perfectly clear as we're going down here. EA is certainly not, blameless on this. From this article, it's looking like EA also put heavy demands on the company, as well as kind of forcing them to do something that they weren't particularly familiar with, without really providing them with the assistance that they could have used. And again, the whole idea of adding and flying, putting it back in, taking it out, putting it back in. Again, these are just major problems. And then we get this. Right here. Let me get this part. The idea that, again, that a core or gameplay loop that they had no idea how to implement or even what they wanted to do with it was the real point that the head, the company lead, said, yes, let's do more of that. And again, all these issues are just like a snowball rolling downhill. And again, as you keep reading it down, so much of this game, nobody knew what it was going to be. And again, there are developers who figure out their core gameplay loop within days of starting designing it. And then we have some more talks about the various studio teams and studio culture. That is in of itself another major topic, and unfortunately it's a little bit too big to get into right now. Them pulling off more people to work on Anthem, again putting all their hopes and dreams on one game. And again, here we go. What exactly was Anthem going to be? And again, if you knew what your core gameplay loop was, all the aspects of your game would be answered by that. Do we want to throw in pets in our game? Well, do pets work with our core gameplay of first-person shooting? No? Then we try something else. And again, once you settle on the core gameplay loop, that is it. There is no more talking. It's kind of like, once you start building a boat, somebody can turn around and say, hey, what if we turn this into an airplane? No, we're past that decision. And until somebody makes that, until it's been locked down, you do not have a video game. End of story. And to really show that, I'm going to scroll down here, and you're going to see something that just really broke. Like, this is the quote that just kind of stopped my reading of this article. Again, more issues. Again, studio culture being a major point. But here it is. I want to highlight this right here. In 6 years of developing Anthem, the core gameplay loop was figured out within the last year to almost year and a quarter of development. That is horrible. That right there, again, this is patient zero for why Anthem failed. Because all the other issues, complaints about studio leadership, the studio culture clashing, trying to keep changing and adding and altering the game, all that stems from not figuring out the core gameplay loop. And again, this is something that you need to figure out as early as possible. Somebody has to put their foot down, draw the line in the sand, raise the flag, however you want to call it, and say, this is our game. And if EA didn't want that game, then you either go with another publisher or you make a different game. You can't turn a circle into a triangle. An orange is not a cantaloupe. And again, all this is just being compounded on top of each other. Them canceling looks like Dragon Age 4, which I know probably pissed off even more people. And as things keep going, and when we get to the actual game, we're going to wrap things up in a few minutes because I already know this is getting really long. I'm going to go down here. That when you get to the end product, again, it has gone through so many failures, so many problems. As the consumer, you don't see that. You see the results of it. Again, it's kind of like that idea that you're only spotting the symptoms of the disease, not the disease itself. Issues like lines not sounding right, or scenes that don't make sense, or story elements that are wrong, or the game not feeling like it's finished. All of those elements, again, stem from a troubled development that stem from these issues that all began with not understanding your core gameplay loop. And this is typically why, and this will be our final point before this turns into like an hour-long video, this is often why, for AAA developers, that the first game in a brand new franchise is kept on the smaller scale. It's the kind of the commercial proof of concept. Assassin's Creed to Assassin's Creed 2, that was a monumental jump. The same thing goes for moving from one Mario game to the next. You want to make sure that people like your core gameplay before you really expand on it. Some studios don't release multiple games. Again, Blizzard spends months and years iterating, refining, and making multiple prototypes and concepts before they make the game that they like. But not every developer has that luxury. And again, once the core gameplay loop is enjoyable and people like it, that's essentially half the battle is done. Now you just want to take that and add more to it. You already have a good product, now make it better. And I know with that's easier said than done. But to wrap it up here, like we said at the end of 2018, a lot of us are really concerned about Bioware. Again, the AAA market is not known for giving developers multiple chances. And right now we're at strike 2 of Bioware. Hell, we could even say they may be at strikes 4 or 5, depending on the games that have been closed. So, what Anthem is going to affect Bioware even further remains to be seen. But, again, it's like watching a slow-moving car crash when you understand how game development works. I'm sitting here reading this whole thing going, yeah, this makes perfect sense how this game failed. But that's hindsight. And as a developer, you have to do everything that you can to make your game successful. And when you can't even get the basic level of your game right, it's only going to cause more problems. And again, a lot of these issues, many people will not equate to the problem of not having a core gameplay loop. But it's all about figuring out where things began. And with that said, we're going to wrap it up here for this video. So, thank you so much for watching. If you'd like to suggest a topic for me to take a look at in the future, please don't hesitate to get in touch and check back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, have a great night. If you're looking for a book on design, my first title, 20 Essential Games to Study, is out now. It is available where most books are sold, and it comes in paper, hardcover, or digital copies. This is the perfect book for anyone interested in learning about game design, whether you are a student, enthusiast, or just a fan. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoy things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel linked down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.